next up, where are we at? I forget what number we're at. Did anybody count it?
That's 7.
4,
So next one's 8?
8.
All right, we'll see
You're at
see if I
9.
can remember them all. Okay.
8.
Analogy. This is a very common structure for like an onion story when you compare two disparate worlds by finding this connective tissue between them, where you find these key words that kind of mean something in one world, but you apply them to a different world. It's called mapping. A great example of that was an onion story. Al Gore places son in rocket to escape dying planet. So there was a picture on the front page of Al Gore in this ridiculous spacesuit putting his son in a rocket ship to escape the Earth that was burning up. So the analogy there, those of you who aren't into superhero comics, is the story of Superman. Kal-El put Superman in a rocket because he tried to communicate to the elders of Krypton that the planet was dying, nobody would listen, so Superman escaped to Earth. And the analogy was so beautiful. I didn't write the story, but I was away from the Onion when it ran, and I was so excited about it because the analogy was perfect. Like they called him Gor-Al in the story, which sounds like Jor-El, and they were just finding all these little connections between those two disparate worlds was really funny.
9.
What's that?
9.
Yeah, 9 is Madcap, which is perhaps my favorite. That's like physical humor, wacky sounds, non sequiturs, banana peel slippage. You know, anything that just kind of doesn't make sense or is absurd or physical. Okay, so we're at 10. Then we have misplaced focus, which is when you intently focus on the wrong thing to make your audience think about the right thing, which is the subtext that you're trying to communicate. This is another common structure for an onion story, where you almost laser-like focus on the totally wrong thing and frustrate your audience because they're saying, why aren't you talking about the important thing? So a good example would be this classic work of satire by Jonathan Swift, an essay he wrote called A Modest Proposal, which was addressing, his subtext was, a lot of children in Ireland are starving to death. And the way he used misplaced focus in that essay was by hyper-focusing on his solution to the problem, which was to eat those children. So he talks in great detail about how to cook them, how to season them, and he just drills in on this with hyper-focus, and it just frustrates you reading it. But he's making you think the whole while, like, wait a minute, this is wrong. This is not how we should be solving this problem. Lastly, meta-humor. So meta-humor is humor that makes fun of other humor. And this used to be kind of the realm of the aesthetes and the sort of comedy for comedians, like Andy Kaufman, Steve Martin did a lot of that. He mainstreamed it though, actually. He would always refer to his act as, here's some comedy jokes, and it was just weird to hear someone referring to their comedy as comedy in a knowing way. And now you see it a lot. It's been really mainstreamed in children's animated movie trailers. You see a little bit of meta humor every time. So the most common type of meta humor is when you bomb with a joke and you try to recover by making fun of your attempt to tell a joke. And so every kids movie does this now. Those trailers, they're so maddening. And I'm not talking about Pixar. They know what they're doing. I'm talking about Sony, DreamWorks, all those other idiots who are trying to make 3D animated, computer animated movies and just, aping Pixar pathetically. Their trailers are all the same. There's so many cliches in there, like some bird usually or some character will slam against a glass window and then squeak down it really slowly. That's a joke you see in every single one of those trailers. Another one is when one of the characters, oftentimes one with an ethnic accent, because they always have like some Hispanic, Latino or black type character, whether it's a bird or whatever it is, dancing or doing something funny, and then they'll try to make a joke that will flop, and you'll hear a record scratch or things will go silent, and they'll sort of do this like look askance thing, and they'll say, that was awkward. So again, same joke in every trailer. They're not trying to make original jokes in children's movie trailers because it's a billion-dollar business. They're trying to make sure they're using jokes that they know work, and sadly those jokes work because kids haven't seen them, so they're all new to them. So those are the 11 funny filters. And that took up all of our time. It was great being with you.
No, please.
I have a question.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
you raise your hand first, though. So go
There's
ahead.
a question. Have you come up over the years, or did you even start out, since you seem to have gone out this sort of scientifically, a formula for matching one of these 11 types to either a subject or to an audience? Or is it just on instinct?
It was totally on instinct at The Onion. So, yeah, I didn't come up with all this before The Onion. I came up with this during The Onion.
But today,
So-
after all these years, have you come up with a...
Yeah, so my formula for success in humor is to be accessible to all audiences. So the 11 funny filters represent the range of people's sense of humor. Some people are into shock humor, some people are into madcap. Everybody kind of exists somewhere on that spectrum of just what they're into in terms of humor. So the more jokes that you can apply a number of different funny filters to, the more you're going to appeal to a much wider audience. So at The Onion, even though it says in the masthead that The Onion is for 18 years of age readers or older or whatever, and marketing people and advertising people always want to know what's your demographic, that's all bullshit. Like, I don't care. I want to appeal to everybody. I want to be Steven Spielberg out there with humor for kids, humor for 90-year-olds, and the way I do that is by hitting every single one of those funny filters and having intelligent subtext besides. So intelligent subtext is really the key, because jokes that are funny will work regardless of whether anyone gets your subtext. But when you have intelligent subtext in there, let's say it's commenting on some political situation or some historical revelation or something, the really smart people are going to get it. And they're going to be laughing and getting something extra. And part of being accessible and having mass appeal is not only appealing to different humor types in people, but it's appealing to different levels of education or intelligence. Most people are really dumb, and we know that. Sad truth. They don't read, they aren't very aware of what's going on in the world, and they're laughing at a lot of the madcap and the shock or whatever, and they don't need subtext. They think it's hilarious. It's great. You know, somebody gets kicked in the nuts, they're happy. The really smart people, they might still laugh at somebody getting kicked in the nuts if there's good subtext and if there are other funny filters going on. And when they like something, they talk about it and write about it and promote it, because they're like the tastemakers and the critics. So you really need those people. And a lot of people who do comedy forget about those people and just focus on the big audience, not realizing, like a good example would be Dane Cook. He's a popular comedian whose humor is not very smart, but it's very popular, and he's incredibly famous and popular, and he fills stadiums to do his comedy. No critics are talking about how amazing Dane Cook is. Just not happening, because he's not doing the rich subtext. So we wanted to do that at The Onion, so we would get those people on our side. But on the front page, in the big World War III size type, we want the most accessible joke in the world that a 4-year-old could look at and go, ha ha ha, that's funny, man fall down, or whatever. So that's kind of my formula, really, in a nutshell.
So it sounds like you're describing then more of like a content strategy for The Onion as opposed to on any given like one topic or one article.
Well,
Or no?
if I were focusing on one type of article or one thing that wasn't The Onion, I still would aim for some kind of accessibility.
Okay, so it
Like,
makes
yes,
it
it's great
everything.
to shoot for a niche audience, because we know that niche audience is going to love to be spoken to directly. But the more accessible you can make it beyond that, in a way that they still get their laser message, is only going to help you. It's only going to help spread the word of whatever this is. You know, it's like metadata
Right.
in the thing.
During your talk yesterday, you started to touch on sort of where you got the book and pulled off stage.
I was past my time.
Yeah, the pharmacy that I don't remember which pharmacy it was. That
Walgreens.
moved from the middle of the block to the corner because it's
Yeah.
easier to access there. Did you go into more detail there? Because that's kind of not directly related to content and online marketing, but still an application of the outrageous marketing kind
Yeah,
of
yeah. So it's kind of a branding thing. It's about knowing what's your brand identity, being able to distill that in a simple word or a simple phrase. And my idea of outrageous marketing, which I just wrote a book about, came out Tuesday. #1 new release on Amazon. Can't beat it. Super excited about it. Thank you. It happened to me once before in 1999. So that was great. But finding that key word or phrase that identifies your brand and then heightening that and trying to live out the most outrageous possible vision of that identity is really, really key. So I talked about Walgreens. Their word is convenience. They started as a company in the 19-teens or the 1920s with this idea that pharmacies aren't very customer friendly. They were kind of dark, dank places where these expert chemists would give you your thing. And Charles Walgreen was his name, wanted to brighten them up, make the aisles wider, be friendly to people, and just make the whole experience more customer friendly and convenient. So it was a huge hit, and by the end of the 1920s, he had like over 500 stores in a very short amount of time. Because he was so hyper-focused on that, and everybody in the company knew that was their mission and that was their brand. So everybody in the company is working toward the same goal. They're all aligned with this idea of how can we make things more convenient for people. So yeah, one of the things they do is if they are in the middle of the street with a Walgreens, because it's the only lot that was available in that area, if the corner lot becomes available, they'll take a loss to move to the corner because they know a corner space is more convenient because people can park or whatever. And they pioneered home delivery of pharmaceuticals, which obviously is incredibly convenient. Like now you literally can just get your pills from your bed. You don't have to get up. And I threw out a couple more examples during the speech yesterday, but with The Onion, it was, we're a fake newspaper. And everything we are is sort of contained in that idea. And it took us a long time to figure out, and a lot of the best brands, often it does take them a while to figure it out. Some of them figure it out pretty early. We were lucky to have this long R&D period where we figured out what our brand was through a lot of trial and error. But then once we did, everything we did, we were acting on that notion that, okay, we're a fake newspaper. What would a fake newspaper do? What would be funny to have a fake newspaper do? And always acting within that parameter, and it just kept us really focused, and it built our brand to the point that now that's what people think of The Onion as. The word The Onion is in the dictionary for a silly headline or a fake headline, which is amazing. An onion headline, I guess is what they call it. So yeah, that's kind of my branding philosophy, is live out the most outrageous version of your brand identity that you can, because that's what people respond to, especially in this world of hyper.
Fake news.
No, I was saying in this world where there are so many choices and there's so much information out there, like you have to be specific and you have to be really laser focused, or you're just going to lose people. Even if you're general. Like Disney, obviously, is a huge company with what we might think of as kind of a general audience or whatever, but their brand and their hyper-focus has always been quality children's entertainment. And so if you're looking for that, you go to Disney. You just know that's the place to go. And they're another one who it took them years to get to the point where they were making money at it. That's another thing I talked about yesterday was that you should chase fans, not profits. Because when you chase fans, that's how you build your brand. People know you and fall in love with you. That's an asset. Like that's real equity. Profits are fake equity. And if you can bootstrap it long enough, the profits will follow. So I never worried about profits. The Onion never made money like in the first 10 or 15 years. We never made a red cent. But we were building fans the whole time, and it was a good strategy. Disney did it for almost 30 years, where they were constantly running on fumes, and Roy Disney was constantly trying to get more loans from the bank, and Walt was just pouring it into quality, just pouring it into quality. So by the time we got to the 1960s, everybody knew Disney was the most quality source for children's entertainment. There was just no question about it. And in short order, they were like literally in the Forbes top 10. I think they were number 1 for a long time, just the most successful company in the country.
We had a question about branding and customer comments online. That I think matches really
Yeah,
well.
oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I bought your book yesterday, the Outrageous Marketing book.
Oh, wonderful,
and
thank you.
read about half of it yesterday.
Oh, nice.
And,
A page turner, isn't it?
yeah, so I'm looking forward to getting to the end
I'm
and
excited.
getting the nut of it. But I know you said you tried to kind of step back. You didn't want to be the brand. You wanted the Onion to be what you were selling, so
Right.
that regardless of who was working there at the time,
Exactly.
they didn't lose value when people left or
Yeah.
attrition.
Steve Jobs made that mistake.
Yeah.
He became too personally identified with the brand of Apple. So when he left, the brand took a hit because people thought, well, he's not there. How is it going to be good?
Right.
Right.
So I'm just wondering, because I did some looking online to see if, like search for satirical newspaper, The Onion reviews, to see, do you take it personal sometimes when you're attacked online and, you feel it's unfair, or does it bother you, or do you ever respond? Because I only found like on Yelp, and that's not a place where an owner or business owner could respond. But if you could, or if you can, do you?
No. So one of the reasons for that is because of what the brand is. So the brand is a fake newspaper, and part of the conceit of that brand is that we're parodying other news organizations. And part of what we parody is how inaccessible they seem. Like they're just this ivory tower handing down information for the masses. So we play that idea to the hilt, and we pretend that we're unapproachable, that we don't care what you think, and you're an idiot, and we're just going to give you the truth. That's funny to us. It's always been funny to us. So when people comment or somebody writes a review or whatever,
You're achieving your goal almost.
I mean, 90% of it is really positive, maybe
Right.
95% of it.
Yeah.
And if it weren't, I would probably be concerned. Like if people were saying, ooh, The Onion sucks, just so not funny, then I would be questioning what we're doing and try to improve it. But since most of it is positive, like anytime anybody has a complaint or a problem or whatever, yeah, we would never respond to that or anything.
And
on
I-
Twitter, Facebook, we never respond to
I
comments.
suspected that would be your response because of the business you're in.
Yeah.
But let's say, because you're an expert in your field, let's say you weren't in the satirical.
I would totally respond,
business.
1,000%. To every customer. I would
Good
treat
or
every
bad.
customer like the most special snowflake in the world.
But would you be politically correct and try to fix the problem? Or, when you feel personally attacked because you feel you are the brand, if I stepped out and went out of business, this farm would go too.
Yeah, so
especially when it's
I
something
know what
that
you're saying.
has like safety issues
Yeah,
and
yeah.
liability concerns, because you
I
spoke
understand what you're
about that too, lawsuits.
right. So I have two answers for that question. First of all, if it's somebody who's, that 80-20 principle. If it's somebody who's so annoying and they're a customer and they're just constantly complaining and being annoying or whatever, I would just lose them as a customer and say, sorry, we don't want to do business with you anymore. But if it's part of the 80%, they're a good customer, but they just have like constructive criticism or whatever, or maybe they're phrasing it in an annoying way or like an angry, because customers can be like very inconsiderate, and they're just like, how come you're not doing it like this? I want it like this, So the way I would treat that, and this is the second part of my answer, is in that dynamic, you're the parent, and you have a baby who's come to you. And I learned this actually dealing with one of our writers who was, just take a sidestep here to tell you this little story about this writer. Really big, deep-voiced, intimidating, charismatic guy. And he was a brilliant writer, and he was the sort of person who would write an article and then hand it in, and if you changed 2 words, he'd make a stink about it. It was perfect. Why did you change my 2 words? Or whatever. And I had an assistant editor and then an editor named Robert Siegel who used to have to deal with him a lot, and he would just get worn down because he just felt like he was being yelled at by this guy constantly. And we talked about, like, should we get rid of him? Like, he's so annoying. He doesn't know how to talk in a constructive way or be cooperative in fixing some of these problems. He just like bellows all of his solutions or whatever. And then it occurred to me, no, he's just a baby.
Mm-hmm.
He's a baby. He's crying. When a baby cries, you don't yell back at the baby. You be the adult. And you say, oh. So one time, Todd was his name. One time Todd was bellowing and screaming at me. I was the person who had changed his story. And I literally just got up and I said, oh, it'll be okay, Todd. And I hugged him. And this is what he said. He said, Scott, I feel like we're finally talking. This is great. Finally happened. It worked. So if a customer did that to me, I would do the same thing. I would treat them like a baby. And I would say, oh, I'm so sorry to hear about your problem. Well, what can I do to make it right, or whatever. That's what a good company does. That's what good customer service is. We've lost customer service in this country. And I think partly that's why they have robots respond, or they have overseas outsourced people who barely speak English to respond. And the customer can clearly tell that you don't care when they get that. That's the message you're sending. I don't care. So if you show them that you actually care, if you're in that kind of business, that'll make a big impact on people. Yes, sir.
So how does the medium that you're trying to convey the humor in dictate what you can do? To me, humor has a lot of content in its delivery and sometimes timing.
Yes.
And seems like that would be difficult to do in a print media or other techniques. And now we're talking about marketing, and we're an SEO group. We've got the internet, so you've got some dynamic capabilities in a web page. But how do you integrate the timing of humor into marketing? And your whole topic is about marketing, so it's
right.
you know.
Yeah, I get into this in my book, How to Write Funny, because that is something people often don't think about. You lose a lot of tools in comedy when it comes to print. You have no timing, which everybody says is critical for comedy, right? Main thing in comedy is timing. All right, well, what if you don't have any timing? Then what do? You have no timing. You also don't know who your audience is. You don't know who's reading. You don't know where they are. The context is everything in comedy. If you're talking to an audience at a funeral, that's going to be completely different than an audience at a comedy club. One of them is expecting comedy, wants it. One of them is not expecting comedy and would be very upset if you gave it to them. And everybody can be, well, perhaps not. If it's Graham Chapman's funeral, then no. But there's a spectrum between that. And you have to take that into account. And so a big job of anybody trying to write comedy is to control the context as much as possible. I often say that comedy is really just expectation management is all it is. And so at The Onion, we tried to control the context. We created this fake newspaper format. So the comedy is being delivered to you through this fake newspaper voice. That sets up the context. Oh, I'm reading a newspaper. I'm a news consumer looking for news. So now we know that much. We can deliver wacky, funny stuff that will be surprising in that context and therefore funny. And it'll be played straight, everybody wins. So that's a big part of it. And you can do that in a number of different ways. Parody is the way we chose to do it at The Onion, but design is another way you can do it. Obviously headline size, like how big is the headline? How big is the subheadline? Is there an image? Is there a photo caption for the image? Is there a pull quote? How big is the text? What font is the text? All these things subtly communicate which thing you should look at first, where your eye goes first, and that's as much as you can control as far as the timing goes. And we had a great time in print at The Onion because you had total control over that. In online, it's different because with responsive design, like you never know how they're looking at it, so you do your best, to try to lay out pages and websites to make that happen. But I mean, that's the short answer. You have those big tools, yeah.
So I've got a question that came in from after your keynote yesterday. Someone was asking, do you have ideas for creating compelling titles or email subject lines that make people stop? Kind of like the Masturbation Month title with the governor.
Yeah. So
What was that one?
Perhaps I should feel guilty for repeatedly referencing my book, How to Write Funny, but I'm doing it again.
Yeah,
Oh,
shameless,
go
shameless.
for it.
I know. The whole book is about how to write a joke. So if you want to be funny, like, I've said everything I need to say. You've got your 11 funny filters, you know how to use subtext. There are other little best practices that I go into, like the importance of brevity, the importance of avoiding cliches. There's a lot of different like best practices. So, and you guys know probably all of the other ones, like a hook, you know, setting up some sort of mystery, an unanswered question that people are dying to know the answer to. You know, I would just Google, like literally it was me, I would just Google how to write a magnetic headline. And then, but the key thing, and one of the key bits of advice in How to Write Funny, is that the key to quality is quantity. And I think that's critical. Most people will write 1 or 2 ideas and pick the best one. You're not going to get a good idea. Write 20 or 30, then pick the best one. Now you've got a good one. Because most people, 90-95% of their ideas are going to suck. That's just how we are. It's how our brains are. Even a professional writer knows that. So they write a lot, and they only select the good stuff to put out there in front of the world. So we all think, oh, everything I write is genius. No, they wrote 10 times that amount that was terrible that they just never showed you. So quantity, super important. Yes, ma'am.
I'm wondering how you work this into getting advertisers. I mean, it seems like a real, I don't know, unique kind of company would want to work with you because it's risky, you know?
Yeah,
you're
it was
gonna piss
hard.
somebody off.
It was really hard in the
Yeah.
early years. It took just pounding the pavement by smart, charismatic people on our ad sales staff to go out and convince advertisers to advertise in
Who's
the
been
area.
kind of supportive in that way?
I mean, it was the ad staff. So it was.
No, I mean, what companies finally came through?
Well, in the beginning, it was the pizza shop down the corner. It was the bar down the corner. It was
Local.
absolutely, because the Onion started as a newspaper in Madison, Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
So our bread and butter was local advertising, and the people who started the Onion, these business guys, one of them had been an ad sales rep at the student daily in town, the Daily Cardinal, and so he knew a little bit about the local advertising scene. He had sold some ads for the Daily Cardinal, and part of why he had the idea for the Onion was that he knew that a newspaper could be more fun and would reach more students if it wasn't just a serious newspaper, if it was a comedy newspaper. So that's why he had the idea to do a humor newspaper. And he probably had a few clients, you know, that he had sold to that he could go back to and say, hey, I've got this new newspaper, want to give it a shot or whatever. And so this was Tim Keck and his partner Chris Johnson, they didn't have any money. There was no investor in the Onion. The printing costs were about $700 to $1,000 a week. So they just had to sell that many advertisers in a given issue. Nobody else got paid. Like, I was the only person getting paid from issue 1 of the Onion because I wrote 3 different cartoons for them, and I was kind of a celebrity cartoonist in town at the time the Onion started. So they were paying the big bucks to get me. I got $60 a week to do 3 different cartoons, which is a lot for drawing cartoons. But they were just like living on onion sandwiches, literally.
Fried
and-
onion, I hope.
What's that?
I hope the onion was fried.
No, Chris actually
Say-
ate raw onion on a piece of untoasted bread. That's what he would eat. So, you know, once you prove that you have an audience, then the advertiser's like, oh, okay, you have an audience. And they're in a college town, you know, they don't mind that the Onion has swear words in it or that it's doing like sort of juvenile humor or whatever. Once we get a little bigger, we're going for the bigger fish. We're going for national advertisers. We want Apple, you know, we want some of the drink company. The drink companies are a little easier because obviously that fits our audience. Apple, so Frank mentioned that story about the governor.
Between alcoholic drinks or?
What's that? Alcoholic drinks, yeah. And cigarette advertising was a thing then, you could do that. But the governor tried to sue us because we wrote an article about him. And Apple computers
Boy, that's great publicity, though.
It was really, we did get some press coverage for that, but the state of Wisconsin was one of the biggest customers for Apple computers. Just apparently they used Apple like in their government bureaucracy or whatever. And so we were trying to get Apple, and our rep was really close to landing like a multi-issue deal, like full page, back page Apple ads, which would have been so great for us. That was scuttled by the governor's office because he was so upset with us. We did end up getting them years later, but again, a perfect advertiser for us because a college audience, desktop publishing was kind of the thing. So yeah, it was a real hard scrabble first few years there. Yes?
That connects really well with another question that I had come in. It seems the Onion received early media attention based on the idea there is no such thing as bad press. Do you agree with that sentiment?
Yeah,
Especially
to a
in
degree.
revelation that it blocked that Apple
Yeah.
didn't know about that.
To a degree, I do believe there's no such thing as bad press. So, but there's a tipping point, where your press can be so bad that the whole world turns against you. So, I don't mean to get all political with you guys, but let's look at Hitler, for example. So, Hitler
I'm a fan, so be careful.
Yeah, right.
Satire.
So, but nowadays somebody could be a fan of Hitler.
Oh, yeah.
Because there are a lot of them, especially in North Carolina. So he got good press, and it was all bad, and he did fine until he got defeated, and until after the Holocaust. Then he was a pariah for decades. But he's coming back. Like, people love him. Every day in the news I see another story about like college kids doing the Hail Hitler thing. I know, it's like people who don't have educations, hey, he was famous and he was strong, they're missing the point. So that's an example of like how far you can go getting bad press, and he still is popular among a certain group. So, and Trump is a lesser example. He gets a ton of bad press, but he has his base who love him, and almost no matter what anybody says about him, no matter how corrupt any of his swamp is, no matter how many officials he have to get booted out, those people are going to love him, no matter how many bad things they say. So the Onion is nowhere close to that. So we had nothing to worry about. Most of our press is happy and laughing. Occasionally we'd overstep, we'd cross a line, we'd do something that wasn't funny, and people would complain. And there's stories about that in my outrageous marketing book. But over time, people forget those, and they all become like the wash of history. But what remains is this reputation that the Onion retains, which is we're an equal opportunity offender, we're not afraid to make fun of anything, which is the reputation we have, which is great. And it took a few mistakes to get to that point. If we had just played it safe the whole time, we wouldn't have that reputation.
Terrorists surprised to find themselves.
What's it?
I said the terrorists surprised to wake up and find themselves. I forget the exact line, but that.
Terrorists
was
surprised to find
brilliant.
themselves in hell. That happened 2 weeks after 9/11.
Yeah, the first
Great
one, I
story,
believe.
great
That
story.
was
Yeah. So
genius.
cathartic to read about them being tortured in hell.
Just even as a headline and as the first thing that you guys released, that was genius.
Thank you. Yeah, they did a
And
great job
cathartic,
on that.
very much.
Yeah.
Because
Yes.
they were expecting the Vestal version.
They were expecting the versions, yeah.
Touching too on the youth or people we were mentioning earlier, and going back to what you're saying about being accessible, and that to quote you, most people are dumb. What are your thoughts in terms of to and in content, right? Especially online, there's the general rule of write for a 6th grade reading level.
Right.
What are your thoughts in terms of any ethical or moral feelings you have in terms of sticking to that guideline and where that leads, or should it be pushed, should it not be pushed? Do you just make this
Yeah,
sort of-
I think it's smart in general because it does make the writing more accessible. So you're reaching more people. When I was in 6th grade, I liked to read books that occasionally had a vocabulary word that I had not heard. And I would look it up and I would learn it, and that was fun. So I don't mind that, but would I want to do that in my marketing? No, I'd want to do that in a novel or in a book for school or whatever. I think in marketing it just comes off as pretentious when you're trying to use bigger words and stuff. And I catch myself doing that a lot when I'm writing a book that's meant to be like a mass audience book or whatever. I do try to state what I'm trying to say in simpler terms because it just makes it more accessible. And I don't think that, and here's a problem I often have with staff writers at The Onion. They're very smart people, they're very educated, and oftentimes they'll write stories that are too dense and intelligent and intellectual and inaccessible as a result. And often the task of the humor writer is to dumb it down enough so that you're still communicating the intelligent message that you're trying to communicate, but you're doing it in a really accessible way. So there's an artistry and a craft in that, so you shouldn't feel like embarrassed, oh, I have to speak at a 6th grade level. No, like that's your job. Otherwise you're just writing intellectual treaties or academic books, and nobody's interested in that. There's no artistry in that.
So where's the place then, though, if everybody's, trying to reach the, chasing the marketing and the audience? Is there an outlet, you think, though, so that kind of writing doesn't disappear and that thought doesn't?
Yeah, like I said,
get invested
academic
in?
books, novels, editorials in newspapers. There's plenty of places for more intellectual types of writing.
The New Yorker.
I think you.
Yeah, absolutely. The New Yorker is going to definitely give you some of those vocabulary words anytime you read a story in the New Yorker. It's great.
I would totally read a section of The Onion, though, that was that, just
For
that's
adults.
some,
For the adults in the room.
Yeah.
I
What was-
think you're in a realm
I was thinking
minority,
if you had a column in The Onion that was dedicated, even if it was the outrageous, snooty academic or something, but I think
There used to be.
that,
there
that combination
occasionally there
would
is.
be, there's
Yeah,
an
so-
audience for that.
Part of the whole accessibility thing, like I was saying, is reaching every level of reader. So sometimes you do want a really dense thing, and it might turn off a lot of more rudimentary readers, but an intellectual reader is really going to be into that. So give them a little nibble on that once in a while. You're going to keep them happy. But is there a place for that in marketing? I don't really know. It depends on what your product is, I guess. If you're advertising in the New Yorker, maybe that's what, if that's your audience. Educated, middle class, white people, go for it. Yes, sir.
So did you, I know growing up, Mad Magazine and National Lampoon were things that I looked at along with reading for vocabulary. Did you have anything that influenced your comedic style in print?
Yeah, so my main influence, I loved Mad, and that was my publication that I discovered, was Mad. And I loved that they could make fun of anything, that nothing was off limits to them. That was a real revelation to me. I never got into the Lampoon because I was a little young for them. They were just waning in popularity as I was coming up. And having said that, though, Mad never made me laugh out loud. I just loved the idea of it, and I loved the art and everything about it. It was a huge influence.
And the character development?
They had good characters. Yeah, no, they did. I listened to comedy records like Cheech and Chong. I remember I had a Cheech and Chong record.
No stems, no seeds.
You know what I'm talking about. So, and then I discovered that Woody Allen had written some books, and Steve Martin wrote a book called Cruel Shoes in the 70s. And I did see an issue of the Harvard Lampoon, and I looked at all these things. And then Spy magazine came out in the 80s, and I was writing by then, but not professionally. And Spy was great, but it was different. It was a different voice than I really wanted to do. But it was the best prose writing I had seen to that point. Everything before that was, I thought, doing it wrong. I thought Steve Martin was doing it wrong. Woody Allen was doing it right, but he wasn't doing short comedic pieces. He was doing dramatically structured, like short stories. So that, in my opinion, kind of doesn't count when it comes to doing something like The Onion, which is just comedically structured short pieces. And so what really lights a fire under me and what inspires me is seeing people doing something wrong, doing it badly. Because then I'm like, well, I could do that. I could do better than that. And that really gets me motivated. Because then I want to kind of blow them all out of the water by doing it so much better. Because one of the things I did was I flipped the whole comedy story pyramid upside down. before The Onion, the way a comedy story worked was it would start by not being funny. The headline wasn't funny. The beginning wasn't funny. You had to read all the way to the end to get to the joke. There's a punchline at the end. And I'm thinking, who's reading the whole thing?
Yeah.
Flip it upside down. Make the joke first, and then have it just get funnier and funnier and funnier.
Well, they should do that with all writing, unfortunately, but it's like there is a treasure in there that the author
Right.
believes there's a treasure in their work to the point where you must work to get to the
That works
The essence.
that works in dramatically structured fiction. Like, I don't mind that. And in marketing, it can be a little annoying how the answer to the question is delayed for too long. But in drama, I want that. I want the unanswered question. I want to be led by a trail of breadcrumbs. But it has to be done wisely, and a good storyteller knows how to hook you and then give you a reward soon enough that you stay with them. Then hook you with deeper hooks, and then reward you a little more. Then you're pulled in. Oh my God, you're really pulled in. A good story will get its hooks really deep in the gut of your heart and keep rewarding you. And then at the very end, at the resolution, you'll get a huge, huge, huge reward. And I love that. But comedically structured articles are just establish the joke, escalate the joke, and finish with a little button. That's all you're supposed to do. It's like a sketch on SNL. That's all it's supposed to do. So you don't want any delayed, any sort of like unanswered question that you have to wait to get to. That's just stupid. People just want to laugh. So give them their laugh, and then give them more laughs, more laughs, more laughs at the end. That's all they want. Any other questions? How are we doing? What time is it? Is it like
It is 10:20.
10:20? Okay. I left my phone in my jacket, but I'm pretty sure my flight leaves at noon. And we're like 10 minutes from the airport, right?
Yes.
Something like
So
that.
I already told them that I could ask questions all day if you wanted to. So,
All right.
but,
All right, go ahead then.
So, okay, so what about the impact of probably amateurish and also violates your rule about developing lots of practice humor before you get to it, but social media it has a source for the humor of the populace. And I find that I get more funny as the night goes on with my tweets because I see humor everywhere. I see a rhetoric, humorous reply to people who are saying maybe something serious. And I'd also like to tie that in with asking about how the politicization of humor has really, to me, deadened humor. You mentioned Saturday Night Live. I don't, this crowd may love you being anti-Trump. I think that there are a lot of Trump people out there, and there are a lot of people that hate Trump, and that's fine. But when you do humor that is partisan all the time, it becomes deadened as far as I'm concerned. So
Yes.
do you
So let me
see that or not?
Yeah, no, I know what you're talking about. So I'll answer the first part of your question first. So what I mentioned before about quantity being the key to quality. So that's true as an individual when you're trying to write quality material. You need to produce a quantity. But that happens on a macro scale with the entire world now on Twitter. All the world's jokes are being put on Twitter, and the quantity is immense. And so quality is going to rise to the top, and the funniest jokes are going to be retweeted the most, and you're going to see those. And so that's wonderful, but it's difficult for a place like The Onion, which is trying to do comedy professionally, or really anybody trying to do comedy professionally, a late night talk show, anything, because you're competing against the best joke that anyone in the world has come up with that day because of social media. That didn't used to be the case. So that's tricky. That's really tricky. And The Onion always prides itself on telling jokes that no one else has told. So sometimes we'll wait until all the other jokes have come out, the dust has settled, then we'll put out our joke and we'll be like, okay, this is the best joke. And it doesn't always work, but that's kind of like the theory.
So
and then,
The Onion won't follow a meme?
No, that's not something The Onion would do, which I think is a mistake, because I think memes are the new comic strips. And it's a new medium that we should embrace, and there are people who do it great, and I like to see it. But it's kind of a crowdsourced medium. It's really unique. But as far as the politics, yes, I agree that if your subtext is too partisan all the time, you're going to alienate a good chunk of the audience. I did a book about Trump. It was called Trump's America. Buy this book and Mexico will pay for it. It came out in February of 2016, before he was elected. And we wrote the whole book, and it's a big, full-color, beautiful graphic book that's kind of a citizen's guide to what it would be like in America with Donald Trump as president. And the whole thrust of the book, the goal of the book for me was I wanted Trump supporters to get just as much humor out of it as Trump haters.
Exactly.
And because that makes it more accessible. That makes it more accessible. Now, having said that, I will admit that I'm not a Trump supporter. I think he's an autocrat, and I think he wants to be a dictator, and I think he's anti-American because of that. America, we don't like dictators.
And
We fled England to get away from that.
So let me
So-
make a humorous comment.
Yeah, please.
So, you didn't think that Hillary Clinton was an autocrat?
Oh, I hated Hillary Clinton.
Oh, okay.
Hillary
For all
Clinton.
the-
Hillary Clinton.
I see a lot of dour faces now in the
No,
audience.
Hillary Clinton was an establishment hack, and I really did not want either one of them to be president.
By the way, isn't anybody running for president of the United States going to be autocratic?
What? Isn't anyone?
Doesn't anybody running for the presidency
No.
of
The
United
whole
States?
point. George Washington took the office the first time, and they expected him to be a king. They expected him to rule over everyone like a king, because that's what everyone had known was kings. And he said, no, it's going to be more of an administrative position. I'm going to voluntarily relieve myself of power after 4 years. And everybody was like, really? Okay. And the word president was laughed at the time because it sounded like such an administrative role. It didn't sound regal. They called him Your Excellency, but he hated that. And he set the tone. So the president is supposed to be an administrator. He's supposed to be one of 3 branches of government. That's how our system works. If you don't like it, you're un-American, because it's a 3-branch government system with checks and balances. There is not an autocrat. There's not a king. We started our own country to get away from kings.
He also, I'll just throw in there though too, he said that political parties would be the death of democracy.
George Washington?
Yes.
Yeah.
That
Yeah,
you cannot
yeah.
serve 2 kings,
Yeah,
yourself and a
no,
party.
the parties are awful. So, but having said that, so all satirists are on the left. That's just the way the cookie crumbles. There are no right-wing satirists. Some people will say, what about P.J. O'Rourke? He's not a satirist. He does apolitical humor. And most humorists on the right do apolitical humor. They just don't touch politics. And the reason for that is not because there's not an audience for right-wing political humor. There are some. But every time they try to do like a conservative daily show, it fails. Because this is a longer point to get into, and I touch on it in How to Write Funny. I'll see how many times I can mention that book today. I'm not doing it on purpose.
You've already sold us by the way.
No, it's all I can do. So the problem is audiences don't like punching down. They want to see authority figures brought down to size. That's what audiences like. They like to see it, the establishment brought down. They like to see established cultural norms mocked. But if you're going after the homeless or immigrants or something like that, people just feel icky when you're going after oppressed, downtrodden people. And unfortunately, that's what right-wing humor does, because they blame the problems on the immigrants or the welfare queens or whatever, whereas the left blames problems on systemic, corruption in structures of authority, because those people obviously have the power.
And other people on the left.
What's that?
And other
The
people.
left blames other people on the
Yeah,
left.
no, and the left, because the left is a true equal opportunity offender. They're going after stupidity wherever they see it, and people love that. Then everybody on every part of the spectrum can laugh at that if you're making fun of stupidity wherever you happen to see it without an eye toward the political spectrum. So, but my political opinions and my personal leanings have no bearing on. I don't want those to limit me from reaching the widest possible audience. That's why I try to make the humor accessible. That's not to say I'm not trying to change minds. Like, I'm trying to reach the Trump supporters to try to communicate with them. and say, hey, you're barking up the wrong tree here. The guy supports white supremacists. Please, let's not go down that road. So, but you can't hit people on the head with that. You can't preach at them. You have to be subversive about it, and you have to sneak it in there through subtext and make them laugh first. And if they laugh, great, you've all won. If they get your message, great. If they don't, that's fine too, because they laughed, and your only job is to make them laugh. Yes?
So Sue asked me, she said, you live in a rural county where they just
bad.
won a bunch, Republicans won a bunch of seats. What can you do to try to convince them to come over to the, at least Senate?
She's asking that, not me.
All right.
No,
I don't know that
but
there's
you-
anything you can do to convince people to change their... It takes decades for people, because those same people were huge supporters of FDR.
Yes.
Because he was a populist and a progressive, and Trump is a populist. But these people are not the most sophisticated political thinkers. So when they see populism, they love it. They don't care whether it's on the right or the left. They don't care whether it's FDR or Hitler, as long as it's populist.
Well,
and somebody's talking to them about their concerns. Because the establishment doesn't do that. The establishment is only concerned with the elites, and they feel left out, you know? So, yeah, it may be in decades, but yeah,
so
you can't.
Unfortunately, though, the discussion that's going on is this is an echo chamber. You keep repeating, or there is a side to talk about the right and say that it is, you know, Nazi and authoritative and, you know,
I didn't say the right would, because there is a political spectrum, and conservatism is not what I'm talking about. Like people who want smaller government
You
and lower
said
taxes and
Donald
stuff like
Trump
that.
is associated with white supremacy.
He supports white
So
supremacy,
name
and
one-
that's
name
not
one.
disputable.
Name one.
What?
There are good people on both sides. That's what he said. When the white supremacists killed that woman in Charlottesville.
He
Yeah.
didn't.
Lying
So
Trump
since
on his
you can take a
table.
single phrase of anything that
Well, that's
anybody
one
says
phrase.
out
That's
of
one
context.
phrase. He also said he's a nationalist. He proudly said he's a nationalist.
He supports the United
he's-
States of America is what he meant, and he said that very
That's not
clearly.
what that word. That's not what that word means. It was a
He's not
dog
what he's
whistle.
said ever since either.
Anyway, I don't want to get down this road either, but
Yeah, we
uh,
can move on.
yeah.
Well,
we can
and
move on.
that's what I see in especially humor. So tying it back to humor, okay, is that I see a long story about the right, and it's constant. Like you can say late night humor, and if you turn on late night humor, it's very anti-right.
It is. It
Okay,
is.
and it's constantly anti-right, and then if somebody like myself will bring it up for a short period of time in a discussion, it's, oh, let's move on, you know, we spent too much time analyzing it. Whereas you'll hear people, I will go into a general meeting, and I will hear anti-conservative comments and anti-partisan comments, and it's okay for them to go on for several minutes or longer.
I mean, I'd be happy to talk about that, and I do a lot. But I mean, this is supposed to be an SEO meeting. We got sidetracked.
Yeah, no,
But,
I don't want to make, but I do think there's a squelch on humor and the message.
Yeah, but I think that's really about Trump, and it's not about conservatism.
Yeah, sure.
Because most of the late night talk shows, their jokes are pretty establishment friendly. They're not necessarily, I would say, against the right. But again, like I said, in entertainment, it's a left-leaning perspective that audiences like. It's a right-leaning perspective is really hard to connect with an audience with that. It's just the fact. Politics aside.
To add to that, part of it has been pushed because there's been a shutdown of accessibility for the newspapers. So you hear some of that backlash through comedy.
Right. Whenever there's a little bit of a clampdown on the fourth estate, then the fifth estate, which is entertainment or the arts, has to step up, and that's kind of what's happening now.
So it's a little after 10:30.
Okay.
I know that you've got to be able to make it to the
Yeah.
airport, and I want to leave some time for us to be able to chat and socialize and such. So thank you very much.
Absolutely,
for
my
coming out.
pleasure.
This
Thanks,
has been a
everybody.
great talk.
Appreciate it.
I did just have one question though.
Okay.
Do you ever look at unsolicited manuscripts, or can people